Colonel, where are all your chips? Snake, it's 4 a.m. What are you doing in my house? I looked everywhere, Colonel. I can't seem to find them.
First up for this week is some issues with the Chinese tech giant Huawei. Richard Yu, the CEO of Huawei's Consumer Business Unit division, stated that the materials needed to produce their own Kirin chips are getting harder and harder to come by. The scarcity is due to the sanctions put on the Chinese Communist Party and subsequently Huawei. While it's unclear where Huawei will go from here, this does not necessarily mean that the company is done making its own chipsets. While the material scarcity does impact the manufacturing of their flagship competitor chips, so those are on the metaphorical chopping block, it still can continue to produce its lower-end chips for the use in their mobile budget offerings. Currently, US companies are barred from doing business with Huawei under President Trump's economic battle with the Chinese Communist Party. Speaking of mobile chips, security researchers have reportedly found over 400 vulnerabilities across Qualcomm's Snapdragon mobile chips. These processors can be found in most Android phones on the market today, and Qualcomm is the premier supplier. While researchers did not make public which processors were affected, nor the specifics of the vulnerabilities, that info being exclusive for Qualcomm, they did make note that these vulnerabilities affect approximately 1 billion Android devices. What little details we know about the vulnerability seems to indicate that the exploits affect the signal processing of the chips, which would allow for nefarious individuals to hide malicious code and possibly lock and disable the device semi-permanently. While we're on the topic of vulnerabilities, some of you might remember some of the high-profile vulnerabilities like Spectre and Meltdown that affected consumer desktop CPUs. While Intel was primarily the one affected, AMD wasn't safe either, with their own set of vulnerabilities being discovered as well. Both Team Blue and Team Red have implemented mitigations and patches from Spectre and Meltdown, albeit at the cost of performance. According to researchers at Graz University of Technology, the real source of the flaw that caused Spectre and Meltdown and even Zombie Load was due to, quote, speculative dereferencing of the user space registers in the kernel, end quote. Essentially, the CPU becomes vulnerable and exploitable when it does a fairly routine process of cleaning up address mapping for memory objects. It's very technical and there's no real way to simplify it for the end reader. The researchers also noted in this case, wasn't obvious, that CPUs with full patch suites of mitigations against things like Spectre were still vulnerable to an attack similar to those original exploits, while using a different mechanism for leverage. This discovery actually represents a serious issue. The vulnerability exploits a fundamental architectural way of how pretty much every modern CPU designs and functions. This is not limited to Intel and AMD processors, but even ARM and IBM processors are affected as well. The best form of mitigation in this case won't be any hardware patches or crippling functionalities like disabling hyperthreading, but it will quite simply be preventative. Just be careful what sites you go on, use an ad blocker, close browser tabs when you're done with them. Not only these are the best practices in general, but these will mitigate the risk of any new vulnerabilities. In case it wasn't obvious already, with the struggles manufacturers have had shrinking down the space between transistors on a CPU lately, we kinda need to go back to the drawing board when it comes to designing these things. Finally, ARM is up for auction apparently. Korea Times report that Samsung is interested in a 3 to 5% holding in the processor manufacturer ARM, but they're not the only ones either. It's been previously reported that Nvidia was interested in acquiring the Japanese-owned ARM, but now Samsung, Apple, Foxconn, and even TSMC wants a piece as well. This would all seem to indicate that a total, unilateral acquirement would be less and less likely. SoftBank, ARM's parent company, does look like it wants to offload ARM, so what might shake down is Nvidia becomes the new parent company of ARM and accepts varying stakes in the business from the aforementioned companies. Such an investment by so many technological giants would be unprecedented. There has been quite a lot of news this week. For example, you might have heard about a massive Intel leak as well as Samsung's new line of Galaxy Note devices. Don't worry though, we'll have dedicated videos on those topics soon. And with that, that's going to do it for this week's tech-related Salt. Make sure to like the video, subscribe for more tech content, and hit that notification bell. Follow us on Twitter at tech_for_thought. And if video games are more your thing, check out our affiliate, cultureofgaming.com, for all of your latest gaming news, reviews, and opinion pieces. See you next time.